Hello, and welcome back to Read the World. My name is Derek Main, and on this channel I review translated literature. Today we are going to review an author I absolutely adore, Jung Moon. Seven Samurai Swept Away in a River, translated from the Korean by Yewon Jung, and this is published by Vellum Press out of Dallas, Texas, one of my absolute favorites. First thing to notice about this, as you can see, it is a slim and beautiful volume. And I think that's important for this particular book because this is kind of a piece of art. I mean, this is something sort of, to own. This is something that you want to sort of hold dear and treasure. That's the way it kind of feels. I actually engage with his writing and his books in a very different way than anything else that I read. So for most things that I read, I'm a one book at a time reader, which I may have mentioned before. Like when I see spreadsheets of people's where they're at in different books, I get a panic attack because I can't imagine like a character from one book to me would then jump into another and all of a sudden be chaos. I need focus and attention. I guess I can't multitask like that with my reading. Well, this is the one exception. When I'm reading Jung Moon, I like to put this at different places in the house. On a bedside table, next to the bath, on the coffee table, maybe on the kitchen. And then just for, even though it's so slim, maybe for something like 10 days, I just kind of, as I'm wandering around, I'll pick it up and I'll pick right up where I left off. Or sometimes I'll just start right from the beginning. And you're going to immerse yourself in this totally unique writer who writes almost like meditations in a sense, meditations and tangents, who tries to strip meaning and just sort of be present and invite you to kind of jump inside his head as he experiences whatever he's experiencing and will travel along in a seemingly mundane, sort of the way you would experience anything. Kind of strips a lot of the pretensions of the writer out of it. And it's really tremendous. I can't explain it without excerpts, which we're going to get to in a minute. And all three of the excerpts I've chosen today are based on how he approaches fiction and writing. But the whole thing is not like a metafiction book where it's all about this is why I'm writing what I'm writing. I picked these three because it gives a good explanation, but I don't want to get into sort of the more meat and humorous tangents and asides because that's the joy of reading the book. So let me give you a basic rundown. Jung Moon is a South Korean writer who comes to Texas to stay at like a little artist colony. He's going to stay with two of his American friends that live in Texas. And he knows nothing about Texas, save for what, someone all the way across the world may understand about Texas, which is, okay, well, there may be a lot of guns and a lot of famous murders, And so we're going to see Texas through his eyes and what it is about Texas, what it is about a place. So this is really exciting for someone that reads translated literature because so often, one of the things I love about translated literature is you're reading about a place completely foreign to you. And you're seeing it through the eyes of a local and someone who is immersing you in their world and their reality. This is very different. I have some of my own ideas about Texas. I'm from the South. I'm not from Texas, but I've been many times. I know a little bit about Texas. And now we're going to see a foreigner see Texas through their eyes and understand what that experience would be like and how that changes our ideas of the place, but also our ideas of the foreigner. Keep in mind that everything here in America, unless you are Native American, we are all foreigners, and we have all come to this place and then changed it in some way and seen it through our own eyes and affected positive, negative, oftentimes violent. There's going to be no violence here, change. So that is really interesting to see in a modern context, someone come over and say, well, what is Texas? Let me see if I can figure it out. I think the only other thing I'd like to say before I get into the excerpts is that his writing, just like Vaseline Buddha last year, is so unique, meditative, and I think you'll get a good sense from the three excerpts whether it is for you or not. But he is one of those writers, I think, that once he grabs you, if he does, you kind of want to go through everything because you want to spend that time with him. And in a way, his books are a cleanse for me. As I've said, like I'm a one book at a time person. And there's something very cleansing about what he does that kind of, especially right after reading a very big book or a very plot heavy and twisty, turny book, it's very nice to pick up something that he has written and kind of empty your head. He has this effect where he truly does sort of empty your head. Stop looking for meaning. Stop looking for connections. Stop predicting the next page. Stop looking for a broader thematic quality and just be. And I really like that. So I'm going to do 3 excerpts today. Page 33, he explains what he's doing with this book, and he ends with a tremendous little note that I think is very funny about failure. D and N, who knew I'd begun working on a new novel, asked me what the novel was, and I told them it was a novel written by someone who didn't know much about Texas, because he didn't know about Texas. A novel that didn't really have much to say, a half-hearted attempt to come up with a series of groundless hypotheses, a mixture of the stream of consciousness technique, the paralysis of consciousness technique, and the derangement of consciousness technique. A novel that even a passing dog would laugh at. And after I said these things, they rang true, and my friends seemed perplexed. And I said the novel was going to be a disastrous failure, to be mocked by everyone, to which we toasted. But there was an advantage to writing with failure in mind, which was to say that failing to write a failure wouldn't really be a failure, so the fear of failure wouldn't weigh you down as heavily as you wrote. And so there's an explanation of the novel and also how he approaches, it doesn't matter, it's going to be terrible anyway, so why not just write it? Of course, it's not terrible. Page 60, type of fiction. So as I said, all 3 of my excerpts are a little meta. I think they're about the 3 only ones. The rest you really are going to go off into very funny, very interesting tangents, sometimes related to Texas, sometimes related to frozen waterfalls. There were too many fictions that made an attempt to say something, and too few that intentionally said something that may be irrelevant. And as for me, I thought that there was a need to think that there was a need to think that there was a need to say things that may be irrelevant, and to think that there was a need to think that there was no need to say other things, and what I wanted to say was things that kept going off on a tangent forever if only that were possible. And that gives a very good sense, I think, of what he tries to do, and that is sort of this desire to go off on a tangent forever if possible. I will say that I do not think he is altogether successful, and I say this with a little sinister smile, because while he, I believe, does truly try to strip all meaning, I still find meaning. And I think that's because it probably is an impossible task. Like, it's something he tries, and it's an experiment, but these are words and thoughts of a seeing, discovering, curious person in the world that, as you read it, they're just necessarily going to imbue meaning. And a lot of the meaning I had talked about at the beginning, sort of the foreigner, like seeing a place with your eyes, that was definitely one. But also I found a lot of meaning in why we attach importance to a place and how that place becomes a center of our identity, personality, in a way that sort of strips us of the need of developing unique qualities. So being a Texan, for all that may be or not be, for instance, could be enough of a personality. Or being from the South being in New England or anywhere, being Southern California. I've picked all American places because it's what I'm most familiar with. And I don't want to accidentally say another region or something that has a very negative stereotype. And while these are stereotypes, I think there also is some meaning in you can just be the stereotype without having to have any unique qualities or thoughts. And that's something I took some meaning from, which I think he would say he would not like. Page 97. This is a long section on fiction, which I really, really enjoyed. And one of my favorite ones as far as the meta goes. I mean, some of the humorous stuff in here that I'm skipping because I want you to read is truly my favorite. It had been some time since I'd become so that I could no longer write fictions in which the story developed so that something good or not good happened to the characters, and the characters said or did something good or not good to one another, leading one another to have feelings about one another that were either good or not good, which in turn led them to grow close to or apart from one another, fictions in which characters changed in ways that were good or not good as other things in the fictions changed alongside them. Fictions that could perhaps be called conventional for various reasons, but above all it seemed that the fictional characters I presented in such fictions seemed like strangers who had nothing to do with me, and ordering them around and talking about them made me feel as if I were meddling in the affairs of people who had nothing to do with me, and I didn't like meddling in other people's affairs, and I'd reached a point of skepticism where I really was not sure if a fiction writer should create problems and conflicts among fictional characters when the world itself was rife with problems. I hoped that at least in the fictions I wrote nothing bad would happen to anyone, and that the characters wouldn't undergo changes through certain events or something, but I didn't know what that had to do with the 7 samurai making an appearance in my mind. So, I think that's really great. Like, he doesn't want to create fictions with characters that change or have problems or conflicts. First off, there's too much already in the world, and also, like, you know, I just don't want to meddle in other people's stuff. I hope that none of my characters like change. I mean, I think that's really funny, clever. But I like at the end, there's something subtle there where he says, "But I don't know what that had to do with the 7 samurai." And I'll just say that to say again that I think, in fact, there is a meaning because I think against his nature, against his desire, he has not found yet that you can do this. I'm curious to study his work as it goes further. I know Deep Vellum has another one coming out, I believe, later this year. Because I do think he is trying to create that fiction. That fiction that is bereft of meaning and conflict and is truly sort of a bathing in the presence, meditative thing, but still a fiction. I wonder what he would think as a writer if he would say, I have not yet been successful in this, and so I'll keep pushing forward. Or if he feels kind of like I do, that it is a good starting point to write, but it is a fool's errand to think that no meaning will slip in, that no changes might slip in. I felt that the writer was changed during the writing of this. So I'm curious about that, and I think that we'll see as his body of work grows, at least in the English-speaking world, as we get access to it, where that goes. Because one thing that I think is interesting and important about this writer is that while these books stand alone, wonderful, beautiful pieces of art, I like to just have them around, as I said, I do think they're going to be best studied as an entire volume to understand what it is exactly he's getting at. It always leaves this thread hanging loose that it feels like he's trying to grasp at, to really attain something. And so far, I don't think it's been fully grasped and attained. Not due to poor work, because the work is wonderful, but because it's very difficult what he's trying to do, and because it almost requires sort of a building up to have that letting go of. I hope some of this made sense. So this is 7 Samurai Swept Away in a River by Jung Moon, translated from the Korean by Yewon Jung, and again from Deep Vellum Press, one of my favorites. Speaking of favorites and presses, my next review is going to be Fate by Jorge Consiglio, translated by Carolina Orloff and Fionn Petch from Charco Press. For now, As always, be good to folks. Thanks for stopping by.